It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
I love Wednesdays because I get to talk to really interesting people. Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder of happyfamilies.com.au and the co-host of Channel 9's Parental Guidance, Season 2, coming soon. Amantha Imber has been on the Happy Families podcast before, a special guest. Amantha has a podcast that I love listening to, Productivity Geeks, people who have big goals, anyone who wants to achieve anything in life. If you haven't checked out Amantha Imber's podcast, How I Work, you're really missing out. Can I send you there once you've finished listening to this interview? Once you've heard Amantha, and by the way, Amantha, like Samantha but without the S, and Imber, like timber without the T. Amantha Imber, How I Work, that's the name of the podcast, and like I said, it's an absolute favourite of mine. But Amantha has written a brand new book called Timewise, and she's joining me on the Happy Families podcast so that we can talk about the book, the podcast, and who knows what else. Amantha, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Amantha, let's just dive straight into the conversation about your book. We can talk about the podcast and things later, but your book is called Timewise. This is the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers. Now, so many parents that I talk to are saying, time-wise, I need that. I don't have time. My kids are draining me. I've got work. I've got the house to maintain. There's so much going on. Can we just talk about time-wise generally? Why did you write that? And then I want to ask you some specific questions from a parenting point of view.
Well, I wrote the book because of my podcast, How I Work. So I've spent the last 4 years interviewing some of the world's most successful people, from CEOs to entrepreneurs to musicians to celebrity chefs, like you name it. I've probably interviewed someone in that genre. And every episode, I'll get these absolute gems of how we can use our time better, how we can structure our days better, how we can get off digital devices and the things that are impacting our time in not a great way. But like, if I were to say, just go through the back catalogue of 4 years of interviews, like, no one has time for that. So at the same time, my agent had connected me with Penguin, the publisher, and they were looking for some new books for the year. And I said, hey, I've got this idea. I've always wanted to turn How I Work and get the absolute best tips and put that in a book so that it's actually time efficient to get the tips, let alone apply the tips. So it's a book about the strategies that the world's most successful people use to use their time more wisely.
And when you say the world's most successful people, I love this podcast, right? I mean, you've talked to people like Greg McKeown, who wrote Essentialism, Adam Grant, who is just, I mean, golly, Think Again would be one of my favourite books of the last couple of years. I'm not even going to try and list everyone else, but extraordinary thinkers, amazing minds. Did you have a process for this? Like, as something came up that was amazing, did you think that should go into a book? That'll be chapter 1, that'll be chapter 2. Did you have it sort of all written, or did you have to go back and listen to 4 years worth of podcasts yourself to put it together?
Oh, look, it was a bit of both. I mean, with every interview, I'd say that there's 1 or 2 things that stick in my mind. And sometimes they're quirky things. Like, as an example, I interviewed this guy called Kevin Rose maybe 3 or 4 years ago when we were attending the same TED conference over in Vancouver. And he is a very successful venture capitalist over in Silicon Valley. He was like an early investor in companies like Facebook and Twitter and places like that. And he told me about how he was trying to reduce his mobile phone usage at that point in time, and specifically the number of times he would pick up his phone every day. Now, for the average person, this is several hundred times a day. For Kevin, it was 100 times a day, which is actually not that much. But what Kevin did is like, I want to reduce it further. So he did something that I've never heard anyone do before. And he tied a rubber band across his phone, like horizontally. So to check his phone, like to swipe up and unlock it, he would have to take the rubber band off his phone. So basically making him a whole lot more mindful of, did he really need to check his phone, or was he just doing it out of habit? So through that very simple rubber band technique, he reduced his mobile phone pickups from 100 per day to 30 per day.
Wow.
So So it's strategies like that just get stuck in your head. And I'm like, more people need to know about this. It's so simple to use, yet it's so impactful.
And as a parent, I'm thinking mobile phones become a real impediment to my capacity to connect with my child. So if I do that, I mean, I'm instantly giving myself the opportunity to have a better relationship with my child because I'm not caught up with the phone so much.
Absolutely. And also for your kids, particularly if you've got teenagers or kids that do have their own phone, like it's such a novel strategy that, I mean, my 8-year-old daughter doesn't have she's got a very, very dumb phone that she often loses, but that's another story. But she certainly doesn't have anything resembling a smartphone. But I kind of think, look, when she's a few years older and she has that, getting her to put a rubber band on her phone, she might kind of think, oh, that's a bit quirky. I'll try that. So I have hope that it can maybe be used with kids as well.
I love that. I was just checking on my phone as you were saying it. We're recording this at 3 p.m. and I've picked up my phone 53 times today. I don't know if that's
not too bad. That's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I still feel like I use it too much, and I like the rubber band idea. It kind of feels a little bit like James Clear in Atomic Habits, where he talks about how if you can make something hard, increase the friction between your craving and the actual behavior, then you're going to reduce the extent to which you're doing it. I love this concept, and I love the way that you've brought that in with something so practical.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of something else, which kind of comes from nudge theory, which is about if you can think about changing your environment to almost unconsciously change your behavior without you even trying. So there's a strategy from Matt Mullenweg in the book. So Matt Mullenweg is the co-founder of WordPress and Automatic. And if you're not a geeky IT person, you probably won't know that WordPress powers about a third of the websites on the internet. So Matt's like a bit of a big deal. Anyway, something Matt told me about when I had him on the show is he will think about how he can craft his environment to help build healthy habits. So as an example, if on Matt's bedside table, the Kindle is sitting on top of the phone, he is more likely to pick up his Kindle and read. Whereas if the phone is sitting on top of the Kindle, he's more likely to do some mindless scrolling. So he thinks about how he can design his environment in a way that just unconsciously nudges him into healthy habits. And again, it's something that you can apply as a parent, but it's also something that you can apply to how you design your physical environment at home for your kids.
I love these tips that have come from the book Timewise, just from the point of view that what we're doing is we're crafting our environment in such a way that it becomes easier to default to something that's going to be better for our relationships, whether it's mindless scrolling or picking up the phone in the first place. Amantha, when we were having a chat about this podcast a little earlier, you talked about a guilt-free way of saying no, something that you've talked about in the book, a guilt-free way of saying no to the kids. This is tricky, or saying no to anyone or anything, really. This is tricky because we have this predisposition, don't we, to say yes, to try to fit it all in, to try to be all things to all people. What was this idea and how does it work from not just an adult point of view, but from a parenting point of view?
So I got this tip from Mia Friedman, which anyone that's familiar with Mamma Mia and the Mamma Mia Women's Business Media Company, I think that is the full title, will be familiar with. So something that Mia told me, like she's not surprisingly someone that gets a lot of requests made on her time, and like many people and certainly like many women, she struggles with saying no. But she started to change her language. So let's just say she was asked to, I don't know, speak at an event on the weekend, let's say, or attend some red carpet, movie premiere or something like that. She would often start her no with, I can't do that. I can't do that because blah, blah, blah. And when you say I can't do something, it feels like, oh, well, maybe you can. Maybe that's a little bit negotiable. And sometimes the person on the other end would come back and say, well, maybe if we did it this way, could you do it then? Could you say yes then? And so Mia started to realize if she changed her language, she could get a better result. So instead of saying, I can't do this, she now has rules about what she does and doesn't do. And so she will say, I don't do this. So for example, Mia doesn't speak at events on the weekend. So she will write back if someone's asked her to speak at something or do some work-related thing on the weekend. She'll say, I don't do work on the weekend. And she might say, why? Because I'm prioritizing my family on the weekend or something like that. But you can't argue with don't. When someone says, I don't do something, you can't go back and say, well, could you? No, because I don't do that. So the difference between I can't versus I don't made a really huge difference in just having a guilt-free way to say no.
You've asked politely, you've asked again, you've patiently waited, you've even made a threat. But finally, you lose it. Listen to me, you shout. In the practical webinar, The Screaming Spiral, you'll learn the top reasons why your child isn't listening, and you'll get pro tips and strategies to get them to hear without yelling. Available on the Happy Families webshop now. It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. I'm talking with Amantha Imber. Amantha has written a book called Timewise, and Amantha has a podcast called How I Work. I love the concept of the things that you don't do. So I'll tell you what I don't do. I don't play with Pokemon. I've got a child who is addicted to Pokemon. I don't play Pokemon, and I know that some people are going to say, "Oh, I thought you were a parenting expert. I can't listen to you ever again." But I don't play Pokemon. You know what else I don't do? I don't watch kids' movies. Because I don't really watch movies anyway, Amantha. But I'm not going to sit down and watch Barbie or Pokemon or How to Train Your Dragon or any of that. So I don't. If I want to watch one, so like if Toy Story 3 is on, because Toy Story 3 is guaranteed to make any adult a blubbering mess, I will sit down and watch that. But I'm very, very, very selective, and essentially I don't watch Saturday morning cartoons. I don't let the kids sleep in past a certain time, and nor do I. I love this idea of don't, because then I get really clear on what I do as well. I do have an active life. I do keep my screen off. I do all of these other things, and it's so easy. I love the Mia Friedman thing as well on that, because I don't work Sundays. Sundays is absolutely, categorically reserved for my family and for other things that are important for us to do as a family, and that means not working. Interestingly, some people have come back, well, what would it take for you to do it? And it's so easy to say, I think you misunderstand. When I say I don't work Sundays, it means I don't work Sundays. You can't get me to do it because I don't do that. And so I love that. I love that concept. Amantha, there are a couple of other questions that I want to ask you about, though, because of what you've written in Timewise, because I know that there's a parenting angle here. I would love for you to please, can you tell me how a tool designed for dieting can actually help kids use their phones less?
Oh, I can. I loved this tip when I heard it. I got this from Tim Kendall, and he was used to be the president of Pinterest. So if you're into designing things and keeping photographs, you've probably used Pinterest before. When Tim was at Pinterest, he was very conscious about his mobile phone usage and that he was a bit of an addict on his phone. He was previously very senior at Facebook. And so knew all about why phones were so addictive, because he was one of the people that was helping design one of the apps that keeps us glued to our screens. So Tim discovered this thing called a K-Safe, which was originally designed for people trying to eat less healthy food less often, like chocolate. And so what dieters would do is they would get a K-Safe, which is a box that you can lock things in, and you would put, say, your block of Cadbury chocolate that, whatever your kind of weakness is, into the box. And then you would set the timer for however long you want. And basically when the timer's up, then the box will unlock itself. So in the case of dieting, you might go, it's going to take about an hour for this chocolate craving to pass, so I'm just going to lock this block of chocolate away for an hour. So Tim thought maybe I could use this for my mobile phone to curb my mobile phone addiction. So he got one of these K-Safe boxes, and he would put his phone in it from about 6 o'clock at night till 8 a.m. the following morning, so that he could be really present with his family in the evenings. And then he'd do the same thing on weekends, but during the day. So he'd lock his phone away for a day. And he found that it was what he describes as a brute force approach, where you are not relying on willpower, you're just using brute force to change your environment. And it got him off his phone, and it certainly helped him be way more present with his family. So I highly recommend it. And I mean, why stop at just our own phones? Why not chuck all the kids' devices in there as well, potentially?
I can't imagine a mutiny at all. Do you know what, though? This goes back to that whole conversation about changing your environment. My read on the research around willpower is that the less you have to use the willpower, that is, the more you create an environment that supports you doing what you want to do without having to use willpower to not do the things you don't want to do. The people who do that have more willpower, not because they actually need, not because they have more willpower, but because they just don't have to use it at all. Does that make sense?
Right.
Did I say that right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They've got more in reserve. So absolutely, the people who are generally most effective at what they do, they've set up their environment in a way that doesn't require willpower to do the things that they do want to do and to not do the things they don't want to do.
You said that so much better than me, and that's why you've written the book. Amantha Imber is the author of Timewise and the host of the How I Work podcast. Buy the book. Check out the podcast. You need to do it. That's a strong. You know what? You need to do it. It's great stuff. Amantha, what a privilege to have you on the podcast again. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon for Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about the stuff we've talked about, check out Amantha's podcast, How I Work. Buy her book, Timewise, or visit happyfamilies.com.au.